We'll go ahead and get started. Chris Fanini is the co-founder and chief technology officer of Weebly, a tech startup based in San Francisco. Weebly is an extremely simple and powerful way for anyone to create a website, blog, or online store. More than 20 million people have created a website with Weebly, and 12% of the US population visits a Weebly website every month. Chris studied at IST at Penn State and then moved to San Francisco with his co-founders to start Weebly. Chris has a passion for technology, infrastructure, and the web. He's an avid snowboarder, angel, and real estate investor, and hours away from obtaining his private pilot's license. And without further ado, Chris Fanini.
All right, guys. Great to be back here. It's always great to come back to Penn State. Love the energy, and it's been I guess, third year now for Startup Week, and it just seems to be getting better and bigger every year. So really cool to be a part of it and to kind of sharing this with you guys. So get started. I think we have like an hour and 15 minutes slated for this. There's no way I can talk for an hour. So I'll probably talk for a bit, take you through kind of the story behind Weebly and get into some of the technical challenges and security stuff that we deal with. And then want to do a Q&A session. So I think that's really important for you guys. I think that's where, feel free to ask me, any questions you may have. So think about, some questions that you can come up with for the end of the presentation. Let's see. So my background, I actually grew up in Pennsylvania, was born and raised in Pennsylvania, grew up in Bucks County. My mom was an entrepreneur, so she started her own advertising agency very early on, so I was sort of always a part of that, got to see her build her business sort of in real time as I was growing up. My father was, technology sales, so he spent a lot of time with technology, always kind of had the latest and greatest, made it a point to get me into that as well, which is pretty cool. So I've kind of been starting companies since the age of 8. Lawn service, which I grew fairly quickly. Candy store, sort of realized early on that software is a bit more lucrative than a candy store or a lawn mowing service. So got into that, was doing consulting, started a small wireless ISP outside of Philadelphia. Back when cable and DSL was really hard to come by. So I would resell internet service via wireless. It was pretty cool. And then studied IST at Penn State. Actually just graduated technically in 2012. So it took me a few years. We all dropped out to move to San Francisco. Dan and Dave got their degrees shortly after, and it took me a few more years. So proud to be a grad though. Generally just been obsessed with technology from an early age. So met David and Dan, my co-founders through mutual friends. Back in 2006, it was 2004. David started Weebly in IST 402 as a class project. Meanwhile, in IST, I was building a RFID-powered kegerator. So kind of interesting. I got to learn more about what David was working on. David brought Dan on, shortly after, and then me to join the team. So, the story, it's interesting. I remember, I was in, I guess it was, oh, looks like the mic's on now, cool. I hope everyone could hear. So I was in The Graduate, and I remember checking my mail in the mailbox. I have no idea why I was checking my mail. I don't really know if I was getting any mail. Probably, yeah, I have no idea. But I got a phone call from David, and he was like, hey, I got a question for you. Would you be interested in moving to San Francisco and work on Weebly full time? I was like, sure, why not? Why not? So that's kind of how things got started. Same thing with Dan, he decided to join. All three of us moved out to San Francisco. So we actually applied to Y Combinator that night, and shortly after, we were accepted for an interview. We drove to Boston from State College. We had this really awesome rental car that we got, and we brought it back to, I think it was Beaver Hill at the time. We were loading up with stuff. We got out on the road. All of a sudden, the lights start flashing, the horns going on, while we're driving. It was what the hell? So I had this issue with the security system, and it was really comical. So we ended up driving that car all the way to Boston, and we just kind of randomly freak out, and we had all these issues with it, but we made it. We're in Boston. We did our interview at Y Combinator, and the day of the interview, we woke up, and we had sort of accidentally launched on TechCrunch. So TechCrunch sort of picked up Weebly from another blogger, and decided to write about us. And back then we had a total of 4 servers, and we really couldn't handle the traffic. So that was pretty interesting dealing with that. The morning of the launch, So fast forward, we actually got accepted into Y Combinator, we moved to San Francisco. We were there January 2007, and from there is kind of where the majority of the product was built, and obviously where we're at today. So in the beginning, like I said, we started with 4 servers. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ender's Game. It was kind of funny. We had Path, Divine Wind, Battle School, and Pacifico were kind of the 4 servers that we started with. We rented space and found space, colo space, because we had our own machines. This is way beyond, or rather way before, Amazon Web Services and, a lot of these cloud providers. So we had our own gear. And I found this guy on Craigslist who was a reseller and kind of said, I'll sell you space in a cabinet in a data center. It was, I don't know, a couple $100 a month for 10 megabits of internet connectivity. And, I think it was like, 10 amps of 110 volt power. So it was enough to run our 4 servers. Long story short, the guy went crazy, held our equipment hostage, said we weren't paying our bill, threatened to disconnect us, all this crazy stuff. Had to call the cops, meet him there at the data center. It was just this crazy thing. The guy ended up, the whole business fell apart. And we moved to another cabinet within that data center. A couple months later, the data center flooded while I was there. So I'm there working on some equipment, putting stuff in. I look over, there's like water coming in the door. You don't want water in data centers to mix. It just doesn't end well. So I think I remember I was on the phone. I'm like, David, Dan, guys, we gotta, everything's gonna shut down in like 20 seconds. And I'm like staring this water coming in the door and this like power transformer in the corner. I'm like, oh shit, this is like, I'm screwed. So then I go to open the door to the suite. As I open the door, more water comes rushing in. So like at this point, I'm running out of this place. I've got my laptop. I left like the power cable and my headphones in there. I run to the front. I get outside of the building to see what's going on. There's like a backhoe that just dug and hit a water main. And you've got all these guys that are out there. They've got paper towels, and they're shoving paper towels into the door. And there's like 100 gallons a second of water coming through here, and they're like putting paper towels into the door, and it's absurd. So fast forward, we moved out of that data center. That was in Fremont. We moved to San Francisco, moved all our gear there, and that's kind of where we've been. So we've got a lot of space there. We've grown, much better experience. So interesting thing to note is through all this, Weebly was the original idea, right? And we built Weebly, and we had this great platform. And this is back when MySpace was still really popular, before it completely tanked and Facebook took over. And we built this other product called Snap Layout, and it was on top of our Weebly editing platform. It was really, really cool. It was like a drag and drop profile builder. I mean, it was actually pretty badass. We did really cool stuff like SVG graphics on the back end. We'd render things in real time and make custom graphics for you. Spent a lot of time on it. Didn't work out. Basically fell apart. And then the next thing we kind of worked on, again, still we've got Weebly going, and Weebly's it's growing. It's not really taking off, right? I mean, we're just sort of like reaching for other interesting things that we could potentially work on and leverage the platform. So we built this other really cool product called Snap Ads, which was a automatically sort of auto-optimizing display advertising platform. So you have using genetic algorithms, really, really cool stuff. So you take an ad in Photoshop and you can cut it up into pieces, and our system would, you build like 5 background images, 5 buttons, 5 call to action titles. Our system would take all the permutations, put them together, and generate a bunch of random ads, put them through this genetic algorithm, and based on who clicked on what and what the demographic was, it would sort of evolve to the next set of ads. Really, really cool stuff again. Timing wasn't really right. For whatever reason, it fell apart, right? So that was like product number 2 that we kind of failed on there. Eventually, we ended up back at Weebly, right? And things have that's sort of where the core of it, and it turns out that was like the best thing. So we stuck with it, and it really paid off. So as far as where we're at now, we've got over 20 million users on the platform. We get more than 20,000 people a day that sign up for a new Weebly account. We're pushing over 4 gigabits per second of web traffic, so it's pretty impressive. I mean, this is like HTTP web traffic. We store petabytes of data across 2 data centers, so we actually do sort of real-time replication on every layer. So the database layer we replicate to another data center, as well as all the storage, any content you upload, it gets replicated in real time to another facility, so that in the event of any sort of catastrophic failure, earthquake, crazy stuff like that, we've got all the data in a safe location that we can spin up and start serving. So we power roughly 2% of all active websites on the internet. It's a pretty big number, and we've got some pretty cool infrastructure that we built to support that. And that's for you kind of network geeks out there. It's our AS number, 27647. So a lot of challenges with building a company like this. The three of us hadn't done this before, so it was kind of like, what are we getting ourselves into? Like what? This is crazy. So it turns out scaling a fast-growing web app is actually pretty hard. So I mean, for us, it's like crucial to maintain uptime because your reputation's on the line. So every minute that you're down or your service is inaccessible or slow, it really, sort of not only does it affect the users that are currently using the service, but it affects your reputation, and people are going to be reluctant to refer your service to other people. And for us, early on and still today, a large majority of our growth has been word of mouth. So just all organic growth. People saying, hey, I got to build a website. You have any ideas? And they're like, oh yeah, check out Weebly. So that's really, really important to us. Security, and that's kind of what I wanted to dig into a little bit more with this talk is the security aspect of things. You're never really secure enough. As much as you think you are, there's always something that could be sort of locked down or something you're not even aware of or no one's aware of that needs to be changed or really focused on. So, with that, DDoS attacks are a pretty big issue for us too. These things have become, increasingly large over the last couple years. I mean, just in the last 5 years, we've seen these truly distributed attacks. So when I say DDoS, it's a distributed denial of service. These attacks, you're basically seeing network traffic that comes from all over the world, basically all at your website. So it's as if everyone woke up in the world and decided to go to their web browser and type weebly.com all at the same time, and it's just, there you go. You have to handle it all. So they become a really big issue for us, and we've had to build a lot of systems around that, and I'll get into that a bit. Horizontal scalability is the holy grail. So really what that means, it's essentially building your system in such a way that instead of scaling up, so let's say you have a server and you're using X amount of CPU, and all of a sudden you need to upgrade that server. Well, you really don't want to have to just keep increasing the CPU on that one server because at some point you're going to hit a max, right? You can only have so many CPUs in a server. You can only have so much memory. You can only scale so high vertically. So horizontal scalability is really architecting your application in such a way that you can add servers and resources next to each other. So you say, all right, this server is maxed out. It's at 100%. Let's add another server. Now all of a sudden that's at 50% and the new one's at 50%. That is sort of that's the ultimate goal. When you're scaling a web application is to get there. And when you're there, things are a whole lot easier. But it takes a lot of work on every sort of every layer of the infrastructure, the application, and a lot of thought as you're building it. So I don't necessarily. So people always ask, well, should I focus on that early on? It's like, well, probably not. Your time is best spent on your idea and just getting sort of a minimum viable product, something that works. But at some point or later, you're going to have to really focus on that. And then the other piece of challenges here is the multi-data center redundancy. So for us, again, we didn't have AWS, we didn't have these cloud providers to run our infrastructure back when we started. And at this point where we're at now, we're at such a scale that it's actually good that we're doing it ourselves. But you want to have redundancy. So like with AWS, you have availability zones. With us, we have our own availability zones. We've got data that's replicated, across geos. That's really important because data centers, they go down. I've seen these facilities that tout, we have, like 10 generators and N+4 redundancy and all this crazy stuff, and then, the power transfer switch fails. So it's like, you've got all these generators running and then you can't transfer the power from the generator to the utility or vice versa. So things always break. It's mechanical, a lot of stuff going on. So you really got to have redundancy on every level. The most common threats, for like a web application, stuff that anyone who's building a web application should be aware of. Really, SQL injection is huge. You can take down and destroy an entire company with that. So really filtering your input and knowing what's going through your system. A lot of people will use libraries and abstraction layers. You need to understand what's going on there. You can't just rely on it just because it works, right? You need to understand it and know what it's doing. So when you're passing, MySQL queries or Postgres or any sort of SQL queries through your application, you want to make sure it's filtered. You know exactly what's going to be hitting that database, so that someone who's got malicious intent can't pull out data that they otherwise shouldn't be able to see. Cross-site scripting, another big one. It's a huge problem on the web. You can essentially steal people's cookies, right? You can steal sessions. You can assume their identity, use the web application as if you're them. Really important to keep track of, and it's a big issue with JavaScript heavy web apps. And then there's OS specific vulnerabilities. And the open source vulnerability. So Heartbleed's a great example. Just came out last week, right? This vulnerability's actually been around for 2 years. No one said anything about it. No one really knew about it. Pretty major, right? So this stuff, you really need to understand it and just know exactly how you're gonna sort of mitigate these problems if and when they happen. For the Heartbleed thing specifically, it's a hard one to avoid. One thing I guess you can do there is you don't run the latest and greatest. You always make sure you're running something that's very stable. So if you're provisioning your own OS and you're running your own sort of infrastructure and hardware and operating system, you want to know that what you're running is sort of battle tested, battle proven, and is going to basically going to hold up and not have any crazy things that they're going to take you down, right? Denial of service, obviously, mentioned that, but that's a big issue. And then there's physical security. A lot of people forget about that, and also group in, social engineering is big too. Somebody calls you on the phone, they act like, this happens like bigger organizations, they act like they're from the IT department. Oh, hey, I need my password reset, and they can sort of finagle their way in, and next thing you know, you've got some outsider who's, in your system, so that's really big. Physical security, I can't tell you how many times I've seen other cages or cabinets in the data center that are just open or unlocked when I'm walking through. That's just massive, right? You gotta watch that stuff. And people often forget about it because they spend too much time just on the application security. So it's a full kind of 360. You got to look at everything and just understand it. So really, what it's about is being proactive. So one thing that we do is we'll do frequent penetration testing. Having a bug bounty program is really good, and responsible disclosure. And what that means is encouraging other people, security researchers, to test your application and look for bugs and look for holes, and then notify you before they just go and post on a forum and say, hey guys, like this site's vulnerable to X, Y, and Z. So having bug bounties, offering people money, $500, $1,000 to again responsibly disclose vulnerabilities is really, really important. You'll see, Facebook I think has really pioneered that. They've got a whole system in place, so you can try all day and try to hack Facebook, and then if you find something, you can basically submit it, and then they'll try to reproduce it. And if it's a true bug or security hole, they'll essentially pay you for that, for your time. So it's a way to get a distributed sort of group all working against sort of trying to hack your web application, but obviously being responsible about it. Real-time monitoring, just knowing what's going on in your system, is really important. This is how you'll see anomalies, right? So the more data that you collect, the more sort of data that you can watch and keep an eye on, and the sooner you do it, the better, because you draw baselines, and then from those baselines you can see outliers. So that's really important. Multi-factor authentication is huge. Now it's becoming more and more of a thing, but essentially, when you go to log into your webmail, you should put in your password, and you should also need to pull out your phone and get some sort of key or PIN. So that way, that system knows it's actually you and not someone trying to brute force or someone who just stole a password. So multi-factor auth is really, really important. Encryption too. So, Mac finally came out with workable full disk encryption on their system. Windows has other full disk encryption systems available as well, but really important. If your laptop gets stolen, you've got all your code on there and you've got passwords and user data, that's a big problem. So having full disk encryption is really important. Bcrypt, some of the stuff we use like for passwords. And when we first started, we would do what everyone was doing, back in 2006, which is just an MD5. They'd store an MD5 hash to your password. So they wouldn't actually store the password in the database, but they'd store an MD5 hash. Well, MD5 hashes are really easy to crack. So, we moved a while ago to a bcrypt system where you're encrypting the data on disk and in the database, the password, in such a way that it's very computationally expensive to recover that, and it kind of scales with Moore's law. It's really interesting. So you can actually set a work factor. So as CPUs become faster and faster, you can just change your work factor, which makes it harder and harder to sort of crack those hashes. So that's another great thing to use, as far as around user data. And then just user data in general. If you're storing, you should never be storing credit card numbers and addresses and all that stuff together. It needs to be distributed. You have to be PCI compliant, all this stuff when you're doing that. Proper firewall policy is really important. Everything should be whitelist based, so you should lock everything down and then only allow what you need through. So if you're hosting a web application, all you really need is port 80 and 443, right? So you need, HTTP, HTTPS. It's probably it. You shouldn't have SSH access to the outside world. Certainly not anything that's unencrypted telnet or anything like that. So that's a good one. And then kind of goes with the real-time monitoring, but it's application intelligence. So just building in systems in the application to sort of look for heuristics and find, okay, we know, looks like we're getting 100 login attempts per second here. What's going on? Like, let's lock this user out. So building a system in your application to use those real-time stats and then cut things off or send alerts or do what it needs to do to mitigate any potential issues that are specific to the application. And then overall, it's just consistency. So coming up with a plan and being consistent is just really the ultimate goal here, as far as being prepared and being able to handle any sort of security breach or trying to be proactive about it. So I want to touch a bit on the DDoS stuff because it's it's something we see every day. So it's really interesting. Many of you may or may not understand kind of what goes on with a DDoS, but we see a lot of traffic. So on average, we serve 5 gigabits per second of outbound web traffic, and inbound is much less because it's all TCP connections. So you have someone who makes a request, and then you're serving all this data to them. The inbound requests are much smaller. So here you can kind of see what happens like in the event of a DDoS. So this middle graph here is one of our transit links, and you can see sort of the normal traffic curve. And there's a big drop there, and what that drop is basically somebody sent a bunch of traffic to our network, consumed one of our links in such a way that we were no longer able to serve traffic. So that is the true definition of a denial of service. So we were unable to serve our customers because of this distributed attack that came, inbound to our network, ingress to our network. These attacks are really interesting. Again, over the last 5 years, we've seen them go from an average of 4 or 6 gigabits per second. Now we're seeing 40, 50, 60 gigabit per second attacks. I mean, it's like massive. And as the broadband penetration increases throughout the U.S. and the world, and as people get faster and faster network connections, this is only going to become more of an issue. It's really something to watch for. And there's like two main types, right? So there's TCP and UDP traffic, and the stuff that is really worrisome is the UDP traffic. It's unidirectional and generally has a lot of bandwidth with it. So you can take down an entire link with that, right, or an entire site, because it's just a big volumetric attack. TCP, it's a little bit harder to get that much data through because you have the two-way handshake, and if it's a botnet, you're not getting that response, so the connections kind of die. But those are two of the big ones, right? And then within that, you have SYN floods, layer 7 attacks, stuff that people are sending specially crafted packets to access your website, and they're trying to do things that they know are computationally expensive. So let's say your site, you have like some hidden link, it's like on the About Me page, and it's doing some cool call to like a graphic, or it's doing some ping to the database. Well, someone will find that, and then they'll essentially start just hitting that page, 100,000 times a second, and it'll just completely kill your application. So it may not be a volumetric type attack, like a high bandwidth, but it's a strategic layer 7 type attack that will consume all your resources and eventually bring down the site. So, looking for all that stuff and having that in mind, like when you're building your web app, is important. And then understanding your weakest links. So, it may not even be you or your application. So if you're using a specific network provider that only has so much capacity upstream from you, or understanding like, hey, if I do get an attack, is my network provider going to shut me off? Is Amazon Web Services going to just call me and say, hey, sorry, you're taking down my entire, all of our customers, so we're just going to cut your service off? That's really bad. So you need to understand, you need to build relationships with people, and it takes time, and it's important though, and it really it makes a difference. And then just the contingency plan, right? So in a lot of stuff we do, we have a lot of in-house mitigation for our service, and we also use third parties in the event that there's an attack that's so large that we can't handle. So just having that in place is good. Next piece is really about scalability and redundancy. So the kind of build versus buy decision. So when you're starting your company, many of you may be like working on a really cool web application or an idea, and you're like, okay, cool, I got this thing, I got this minimum viable product, it's on my laptop, it's running. Like, what's the next step? How do I get this thing live? So your best bet is probably to use something like Rackspace or AWS. Get it out there, you rent some equipment, it's really, really cheap now. It's bandwidth and storage is just super cheap, and compute power. So it's really the best way to start. And as your idea takes off, you kind of reevaluate and say, hey, do I need to, depending on what kind of company it is, what kind of product, you may or may not need to look at potentially, hosting your own hardware. But generally these days, you can get away with a lot just renting from other people and not have to deal with the whole hassle of running your own equipment. So kind of as I touched on previously, architect with scalability in mind. So, don't overthink it, but think about how this thing might scale. So one day, if it's a certain type of application that requires a lot of CPU, how are you going to scale it? How are you going to be able to add more nodes, whether you're adding physical nodes yourself or whether you're using AWS and spinning up other instances? How is it going to scale? What's it going to look like? How's it going to perform? Can I scale it quickly? That's stuff to keep in mind. Backups are huge. Take backups every day, every hour, every minute, whenever you can. Come up with a backup system and test it. Make sure that the backups are actually working. So no one ever said, hey, I have too many backups. It's, the more backups, the better. And again, make sure that you come up with a system for testing them on a regular basis. Last thing you want is to have to rely on a backup and it's either not there, it's corrupt, or some other issue. So that's key. And what I've learned, the last couple of years is bad things will happen, and it's always when you least expect it, and most inopportune time. And we've just had some crazy issues at the worst possible time. I mean, getting on a plane and all of a sudden, the site goes down, or you need to be prepared for that and have other people that are available to assist, when there's an issue, because it always happens when you least expect it. And that's really all I've got. So I'd love to open up to questions with you guys. I mean, anything you might have, if you're maybe thinking of building a web application, or you have, or maybe running into like scaling type issues. I'd love to sort of answer any questions, or general questions about startups in general, security, anything. So, yeah. What's up?
Does Weebly have its own application system to add features to Weebly?
Great question. So the question was, does Weebly have its own sort of ecosystem or developer sort of area, developer ecosystem, so other people can build on top of Weebly, or do we do it all in-house? So the answer is, right now we do it all in-house. I mean, everything we build is a Weebly specific feature, but we are working on opening up more of an API and a marketplace for other people to build applications on top of Weebly. So that's pretty important to us, and something we've been thinking about for a while, and we just want to make sure we do it right when we come out of the gate with it. So we're working on it, and we're excited about it. So yeah. Come on, guys. Questions?
Where do you find most of the attacks originating? Is it the usual suspects in Eastern Europe and Asia, or
yeah.
domestic too?
So the question is, where do we find most of our attacks on the service originating from? And it's actually really interesting when you look at the data. So we've looked at packet dumps from some of this traffic, and it's comical. I'll never forget the first time I'm looking at this traffic, and it's like source network is FBI, U.S. Department of Agriculture, CIA. It's like, oh, what the hell? This is just really strange. So what happens is, basically with the internet, the way it's architected, it's a system in which you can send things asynchronously. So packets, can come from a different packets rather can arrive, from a different path, and they would, go back the other way. So we see traffic from all over. Most of the time, the source address is spoofed, but because we have insight into the entire network, we can essentially see which geographies are coming from. So a lot of it is China. A lot of the traffic comes from China, and that's just that's kind of what we've seen. Yeah. Don.
What are they trying to do when they do this?
Yeah.
Are they trying to bring you down, or are they trying to find out about your web?
Great question. So the question is, what are they trying to do? These attackers, are they trying to bring down the site, or they, extortion, that sort of thing. We've seen extortion. So we've actually had, in the past, we've gotten emails from people that say, hey, we're going to attack you if you don't do X, Y, Z. A lot of times it's if you don't take a site offline, or you don't pay us X amount of money. We ignore those requests. We're not. That's it's bogus. We're not going to get involved in that. We've never had an issue because of it, but we've seen an increase in attacks around political activities. So for whatever reason, Russian election season, we get a shit ton of traffic. So then there's some sites out there that people host. I mean, it's all about free speech, and we're not going to take their site offline just because it's getting traffic. Actually, in fact, sites that get attacked, we more or less accelerate them. So what we'll do is we'll take the site and we'll put it in memory in our load balancers, so it actually gets served up even faster. And a lot of times that'll cause the attacker or the botnet to sort of like fall over because the responses come back so fast. So we have fun with it. We've done stuff where we'll find out who's attacking us and we'll do 301 redirects like layer 7 and we've just blown people out of the water because we have a ton of bandwidth. So we tend to have fun with it when we can. Yeah.
Can you tell the story of the torrent tracker that was posted?
Yeah, so that's actually the 301 issue. Yeah, so we had, so Weebly's got this really cool feature, which I actually built, years ago, and it's this idea of a custom 404 page. So you can basically build a page. It's kind of a hidden feature. You can build a page and name it 404.html, and if your site, you get a request that for a page that doesn't exist, it'll serve that 404 page. So it's cool. It's kind of like a custom branded 404 page. And we had this company, it was like this torrent network. They had this torrent software, and their software kind of got hokey, and they didn't know what it was doing. It was making all these requests, but they couldn't really tell. So they moved their domain to Weebly, the domain that the requests were going to, and they set up a custom 404 page with a contact form that said, like, hey, what the hell, like, how did you get here? And they were just trying to gather data to figure out, like, why this traffic was coming to this site, and they were trying to figure out using our analytics, what page they were hitting. So we saw this, and it was a lot of traffic because it was this huge, like, torrent client network. And that's when we put in this 301 redirect to the actual company that was doing the torrent, that had the torrent software, once we figured out who it was. Next thing you know, I think it was like, within 2 minutes, their entire site went down, and we killed them. And we got somebody on Twitter, got a hold of one of my network engineers, was like, hey guys, like, we're really sorry, like, I don't know what's going on, like, you guys are like attacking us, and we're like, haha, like, this is funny. So next thing you know, like 2 days later, this guy comes over with a bottle of wine to our office, and he's like apologizing, for his using our 404 handler, like that. So it was funny, yeah. Any questions?
I have a question from Twitter.
Yeah.
Are there any plans to incorporate paying for your Weebly account with Bitcoin?
Probably not in the near future. It's just not a priority. And to be honest, most of our users are probably not going to be savvy enough to be using Bitcoin. The majority of them, and there will be some people, but that's not sort of our target demographic, right? So, yeah, there's some risk associated with that, of course. So, Dan.
A lot of the stuff you talked about is fairly advanced.
Yeah.
How would you suggest like people get more familiar, learn how to actually do a lot of what you're talking about?
Yeah. So there's some great sites out there. There's some great scalability sites. If you're into this kind of thing, sort of just architecture, scalability, infrastructure. There's some really cool sites. I mean, one that comes to the top of mind is High Scalability. Generally, they have pretty cool overview articles, and then they'll link kind of deeper into other areas. But really, I mean, just spend some time, reading around. Hacker News is a great resource for kind of all things startup, including, scalability. But there's a lot of really good data out there, and the cool thing is a lot of people have done this before. So there's a lot to learn from people. The biggest challenge throughout the whole process from when we started till now. It's interesting. I just, keeping the momentum. I mean, just really staying focused. It's easy when you build a company and you have these aspirations and you have these goals, right? You want to build this like big business, and you just can't seem to get there, right? It's like, you wake up every day and you're excited because you're excited about the stuff you're working on, and you're in your sort of little, little echo chamber. So just staying motivated and staying, just keeping that motivation. And I think a lot of that comes down to the team that you're with, right? I mean, we're lucky enough, the three of us were really, really close friends before we started Weebly. We still are, and has a lot to do with the motivation and sort of just the overall success of the company, I think. Yeah. So.
How do you manage the content on that website?
Yeah, great question. So how do we manage the content that's posted to Weebly? to make sure that they adhere to our terms of service. Well, we have, again, over 20,000 people a day that sign up and publish a site. So those are new users, and then we have existing users from that 20 million plus people that are coming back, logging in and publishing sites. So there's no real way we can sit there and have a site every time it gets request to publish pop up and we can approve or deny it, right? It's just not possible. So the cool thing is the DMCA allows us, it's a system basically. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act affords us the ability to basically respond to requests from people. So if someone says, hey, you're hosting a copyrighted site, it gives us a certain amount of time to actually take it down. So we can't proactively go through every single site and decide whether the content is legal or not. But when people notify us via our abuse channels or customer support, we can take a look at the site and take it down. So we've got a pretty good system in place too, and just a large network, and there's a lot of people out there. So we get notifications all day long, from people who say, hey, this is a site's against your terms of service, or this site is stealing copyrighted content, and we'll ask them for proof, and if it's a valid request, we'll take it down. If it's not a valid request, we won't just take someone's site down. We're pretty diligent about that. So it's yeah.
When you decided to move and kind of get this going, what was the learning curve here, or just where you needed to be and how did you?
Sure. The question is, when we moved, kind of what was the learning curve from when we started till now? I guess how long did it take us to sort of just learn all this stuff? I can't necessarily put a timeline on it as far as the learning curve. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I think we did in IST that helped prepare for that. But a lot of this stuff is so unique and so different than what you're going to work on in your class that a lot of it's just sort of learning on the job. So just having certain experiences that you build on, and over time you figure it out. Yeah, so the question is, when Weebly started, do we have to use our own money to sort of get the service going, or do we have to sort of raise money? And both. So in the beginning, we used our own money. We bought our own servers. We paid for our own co-location. We had started with servers in Pittsburgh, and we were buying. I remember buying memory for those. Driving up there with David in the middle of the night, like putting more memory in because MySQL cluster edition was a total piece of shit, and just kept like using all the memory. So that was like, we're spending money on that. But eventually when we got accepted to Y Combinator, it's actually kind of funny. They said, all right, well, you guys are in, we'll give you money for your plane tickets to come out here, all the stuff, the travel cost. And you need any other money, like for anything? We're like, yeah, we need money for servers, And they wrote us a check for a couple $1,000s, I think, to go buy a few more machines. And that kind of got us going, and we're pretty scrappy. So, I mean, I wish I had more pictures, but some of the servers and stuff we were running are all busted, and but they worked, right? I mean, they had CPU and memory and power, so yeah.
So it was like financially crippling at first.
It wasn't fun. I'll tell you, the thing that's financially crippling was the rent payments, just to live, in San Francisco. But servers were really not all that much money, and would be even less had we started today with AWS. Be nothing. But yeah, I mean, there was a point where we basically ran out of money, and we were living in San Francisco, and we had all our servers there, and that's where our company was. Working out of our living room. It was the three of us, and actually there's four of us at that time, and we were like out of money. We were like, what are we going to do? Okay, we probably have to move to San Jose, which is like an hour and 20 minutes south. Just really not where you want to be trying to do this thing. And yeah, it was pretty close, but we had launched sort of the monetization efforts on Weebly, so we started selling domain names. We had this idea of pro service, and things kind of started to slowly tick up, and we kind of came out of the grave there, so to speak. Yeah, it was a roller coaster though, for sure. So,
what was the biggest difference between the writing and in person for like Paul Graham and other Y Combinator founders?
The biggest, I'm sorry?
Difference, just versus the writing or on videos of speeches and in person when they're actually interacting.
So he asked what the biggest difference between sort of Paul Graham and that, I guess, that crew of people, they're the founders, of Y Combinator, in person versus like if you read their essays and their writing. I mean, Paul Graham's a pretty sharp guy, really approachable, easy to talk to. Those guys are all pretty down to earth. I mean, that's the nice part about it. They've got great advice and they've got great experience. And one of the interesting things with Paul Graham in particular and that whole crew, actually, they started ViaWeb, which eventually became Yahoo Stores. So we were, and we sort of knew this, but we were applying with our idea, and we were talking about Weebly, and Paul Graham's like, yeah, he's like, I basically built this, in like 1995, and we we're like, oh shit, yeah, you're right, it's pretty cool. So, he understood, he got it, and this was kind of like we thought of it as like a new version of ViaWeb almost, right? And then now, fast forward, quite a few years, and we just launched our e-commerce in November, and now we're kind of much better than that, but.
Kind of a fun question from Twitter, but when they make a movie about Weebly like they did The Social Network, what actor do you want to play you?
When they make a movie, what actor do you want to play me? I have no idea. That'd be pretty cool, though, yeah. I'd love to try to act myself. I think I would be pretty terrible at it, but I don't know. Chris Fanini playing Chris Fanini, I don't know. Any other questions? Chase.
Does Weebly have an in-house security team, or is that outsourced?
The question is, Weebly have an in-house security team, or is it outsourced? We have an in-house network operations team, and part of their duties is security. So we're not quite at the point where we're going to need to have our own security team, but we will get there as we grow. But a lot of those tasks are are part of the network operations group. Yeah.
When did you decide that you needed to hire your first employee, and what was that process like?
So the question is, when did we decide we needed to hire our first employee, and what was that process like? So I had a picture of our. I don't know if I can get back there. So this was our original logo that David created when he was building, Weebly, and this thing was awesome because we had it for quite a while, and the whole interface sort of matched it. Had the same sort of feel with the gradient and everything. And eventually, we came to a point where we had this awesome product, and it was functioning really well. And we're like, man, like what? How can we make this better? And we had like our home page. It was based off sort of like a WordPress theme, and we were thinking about it. And we're like, all right, well, David and I were doing a lot of the programming, and Dan was handling a lot of the product and the customer support. And we're like, all right, well, who could be the best hire right now? So we decided we need to get a designer. So that was our first hire, was Justin, who's our designer, still with us today, great guy, and he helped sort of just transform the whole thing. And it's funny, design has a lot to do with, obviously it has a lot to do with the success of your product. The design and usability, you have the greatest technology, you have all this crazy stuff in the back end, but if it doesn't make sense and it's not visually appealing and it's not easy to use, it doesn't matter what the hell you have going on behind the scenes. So Justin was crucial to sort of getting us. Getting that product, that better look and feel, and getting things really looking solid and focusing on usability. The question is, how do we evaluate the market space before we start it? It's probably a better question for Dan here, but I'll take a shot at it. So we were actually like the first drag and drop website builder. This was back, Ajax was sort of coined, while we were working with this. And it was just really hard to build a website. I think a lot of it started at Penn State, right? There was this requirement that everyone build an online portfolio. We had all our friends come to us and say, hey, can you help us build our online portfolio and use this like SFTP client, and you got to like log in. If you name the page index.html with like a capital I, it doesn't load. It's got to be lower. Just like stupid stuff that you shouldn't have to worry about, right? When you want to get a website running. So it's very obvious and very evident from the get-go that there needs to be a better way for people to build websites and attractive websites. Most people were building using Microsoft Front Page. If you guys remember that, but Front Page was like the tool of choice. And they were building these like online Word documents. 'Cause Front Page was basically Microsoft Word, but it saved files instead of doc. It was like HTML. I was like, okay, cool. And they were just these crappy looking, sites. So it's pretty obvious, I think, that something had to change, and it needed to be easier. It's at a time when, and these still exist. There's all these website hosting companies out there that just gouge you. They charge you like $10 a month for for like just nothing, you know, and we just saw that and knew it really had to change. So.
What was it like telling your parents and then picking up and moving to the West Coast?
So the question is, what was it like telling our parents and picking up and moving to the West Coast? So, yeah, it was pretty funny. I sort of had mixed reviews on that from either parent. And I remember telling my mom, and again, she's more like the entrepreneurial type and, you know, started her own business. And I told her, like, hey, Mom, I think I told her when we applied, I said, hey, we might get into this thing, but I doubt it. And even if we do, you know, we're going to move out there for 3 months and then probably just be back here. And she's like, oh, it sounds like a great experience. You know, totally go ahead and do it. I was like, but, you know, the thing is, I've got to drop out. You know, I can't finish my senior year. And she was like, oh, like that's you know, are you sure this is what you want to do? Is this the right decision? And she got it, you know, and she understood. And then I told my dad, and he was like, I don't know about that. You know, you should probably finish your degree. You know, he's been like helping me pay for college for the last 4 years. You know, he's kind of really wanted me to get my degree, but he still kind of got it. But he was definitely more towards leaning more towards like finish your degree before you move out there. But it was cool. And then when we told them we got accepted and we're going to move out, they were pretty excited. Yeah. All right. Hey. So the question is, right now at this point in time, is there anything that people should be learning or focused on when developing their web applications to make them more secure? It really depends. It's very platform sort of specific, right? If you're using PHP or using Ruby, you know, really the best thing to do is you look at the best practices out there around security for your specific platform, for whatever abstraction layer you're using. You know, if you're using Rails, then there's going to be sort of you know, best practices around Rails. If you're using PHP, you know, there's PHP. The problem with PHP is it's like inherently insecure. It's just it's not a great language. I mean, we're written in PHP and Facebook's written in PHP, but as far as anything specific, I mean, it's really focused on best practices. You know, as you get larger, again, having that sort of like bounty program, there's just always, the thing with security is there's always going to be something you just don't see or don't, you know, it's really hard. You're never going to sort of wrap your hands around it. It's never going to be like, okay, this web application is secure, let's move on to the next thing. I mean, it's just never going to be that way because at the end of the day, it's humans that are writing all these programs, no matter how far up the sort of abstraction layer you are. There's still, you know, everyone in between who wrote a piece of that, and there's going to be some vulnerability. So it's not really a great answer, I mean, as far as specifics, but best practices, I mean, are key. Just follow them. And, you know, it's like some of the stuff I talked about, the XSS, you know, the SQL injection, I mean, those are like the big ones, right? But, yeah.
What is that? I guess, what was your, like, first experience like moving to Northern California and being in, like, this epicenter of the United States, and how fast do you guys have to move compared to keeping your word?
Yeah. So the question is, kind of what was the experience moving to the epicenter of sort of technology, you know, and web applications, right, in Northern California, and how fast do we have to move to sort of keep up with, I guess, the competition or just in general? It's pretty wild. You know, I remember when we first moved out there, you know, it's the first time, like, I remember, like, walking down the street. I was going to get, like, a burger or something. It was, like, a very vivid memory. And I heard, like, I'm just walking down the sidewalk, and like I overhear somebody talking about, it was like MySQL, like query optimization, like on the sidewalk. I'm like, what the hell? Like is this real? And I was like, that's like a weird thing, right? But essentially that's what it is. You're in this place, much like you're in Penn State with, you know, 40,000 people that are all your age, plus or minus, you know, a few years. In Silicon Valley, you're sort of with all these people that are all working in the same environment, all in the same, similar things, using, you know, all this different technology. So it's really neat to have that. And that ecosystem there is kind of what keeps it going, and it's very fast paced. You know, it's you know, I know Dave always uses the analogy of like major leagues versus the minor leagues, and I think that's very true. You know, it's really, you're taking sort of the best of the best and putting them all in one spot, and there's just crazy innovation at very breakneck speed, you know. But you sort of get into it, and you sort of, you know, you kind of work your way into it, and you start to understand it, and you start to sort of become accustomed to it. It's not scary, it's just got a lot of fun. It's really invigorating. I mean, it's like the same feeling when you're with your peers and you guys are all into the same thing, you know. It's just on a larger scale. Yeah. All right. Good? I think we're good. Great. Thanks, guys. All right.
Thanks, Chris.